Okay, so let's get started. So good morning and thank you for joining us today for another Eploy Partner Webinar. Today's topic being Unlocking the Talent Trinity with Behavioural Science and AI. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. If you would like to ask any questions during the webinar, then please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and then Becca will be happy to answer them at the end. We are once again Becca Ginchard from AssessFirst, one of our Eploy Marketplace partners. Becca is the leading voice of the AssessFirst mission to transform global TA and development. She joined AssessFirst with a background in HR, operations and recruitment management within UK retail, engineering and finance sectors. Now, we all know that inclusivity and cultural fit are critical components of successful recruitment strategies. The key to success, according to Becca, is predicting how and why people find purpose through work. By collaborating with some of Europe's leading organisational psychologists, Becca has enabled AssessFirst international growth with their behavioural assessment software actively used by over 10,000 recruitment and HR professionals in 35 countries. So I'm now going to hand over to Becca, who'll be showing us how to unlock the talent trinity with behavioural science and artificial intelligence. Becca, welcome and good morning.
Thank you, Bruce. What an introduction. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Hopefully, can you see that?
Yeah, that's coming through loud and clear.
Brilliant. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in this morning. Today, I wanted to explore with you something that we call the Talent Trinity here at AssessFirst. Now, I'll get to what that means in a second, but at the core of this subject is actually psychology. So psychology in business, psychology in process, and in particular, psychology being used in a descriptive approach in order to improve our people processes within our companies. Now, I am sure that there are possibly people on the call that currently use psychometric assessments and science within their recruitment processes. What I wanted to explore specifically today is really looking at understanding how you can leverage this psychology to not just tell us how somebody will behave in a certain situation, for example, but to take it a step further and really start to predict success for our businesses and use machine learning and AI to ensure that we are making unbiased, data-driven decisions on our people, which today's standard use of psychometric testing doesn't necessarily offer. So the Talent Trinity, in short, is ultimately three elements of our businesses where we can and do see a huge improvement from using science. And that looks at recruitment, it looks at team performance, and at the facilitating of hybrid working. And so that's what I wanted to kind of run through today. A quick introduction to myself, as Bruce mentioned. I'm head of strategy for the UK here at AssessFirst. Now, today you'll see a lot about what we do at AssessFirst, but in short, we ultimately identify the potential in individuals. So whether that be candidates that are coming through your process, or whether that be teams or existing team members that sit within your team today, we're able to identify the likelihood that they will succeed within a specific role and within a specific company culture, really bringing data into that decision and providing you with information that will sit above and beyond the CV and above and beyond interviews that you will have had with those individuals. So let's get straight into it and look at that first element of that talent trinity, predictive recruitment, and look at how it can help improve through the leveraging of psychology. So why is this idea of predictive recruitment so important? Well, on average, every year, a company will experience approximately, and obviously this will vary from one industry to the next, but approximately 18% turnover in its workforce. But by contrast, if we look at annual high performer turnover rates, it's on average just 3%. And when you take the kind of best businesses out there, the most performing, high performing businesses out there, that number is nearly zero. So there's obviously a huge use case if we could find a way to recruit high-performing individuals into our businesses. It's going to reduce staff turnover. It's going to have a huge impact to, time spent in the business and ultimately bottom line. Now, using psychometrics, what you're able to do is you're able to take those candidates that apply for a role, those internal team members that are looking maybe for promotion, and identify out of those who will sit in this upper right quartile of this graph here. So here you have level of performance versus level of engagement. And we want to find those people who will have a high level of performance, highly engaged within the business, and therefore will ultimately become the ambassadors of the business. How do we do that specifically at AssessFirst? So we focus on something called unbiased algorithms, which is a composition really of two things. First is high quality data. Now that's data that either you will feed into the tool or you can use the data that sits already existing within the tool, coupled with a systematic approach. And it's that systematic approach that will ultimately mean that your teams or you and your teams will start to really see the benefits from a time-saving position. Now, I mentioned that we kind of assess the overall potential of an individual, and we feel that there are three key elements to understand of an individual in order to determine their level of potential within a business. And that's what you see here: cognitive abilities, their personality, and their motivations, their drivers, what gets them up in the morning and what gets them wanting to go to work. And so we've developed three key assessments that look at assessing these elements within an individual. What we call the brain assessment, which is that cognitive ability piece, very much looking at understanding how somebody processes information, what extent of information and at what speed, looking at the potential in their mental capacity. Secondly, what we call our shape assessment, which is that personality piece, looking at how somebody will behave in a certain situation, a stressful situation, for example. And finally, our drive assessment, which is that motivation piece, which actually sets us aside from a lot of our competitors and a lot of psychometric tools out there on the market, in that we help to understand how somebody wants to work in what kind of environment alongside what kind of manager. So really touching in on that turnover point. 9 times out of 10, we know people leave businesses not because they can't do the role, but because they don't necessarily want to be there. And so this element in particular will help determine that factor even before somebody has been recruited. Now, from a candidate perspective, that's really, really crucial for us. Each assessment takes just 10 minutes to complete. And ultimately, at the end of that, you will have an understanding of what somebody's natural talents are. So what can they bring to the business above and beyond their CV, above and beyond their previous experience? Now, how does it work in practical terms? There are 3 key steps. The first step is to help identify that what good looks like. And we do that through creation of an algorithm. Now, in practice, the most accurate way to do that is to use the data that you have already sitting within your business, using those sample set, those team members already sitting within a specific role that live and breathe your company culture on a day-to-day basis. So what you would do is you would request a minimum of 10 people within your organization within a specific role, take the assessment. Once that's completed, the system understands their personality, their motivation, their mental agility. You would then input on a 1 to 5 star rating their actual performance on a day-to-day basis, their actual attitude on a day-to-day basis. And from that information, the system will start to determine the difference between those who are high performers, low performers, those with a great attitude and a poor attitude, and ultimately pinpoint and identify those traits that are crucial to success, very much associated to somebody's natural talents. And that will be the most data-driven way that you will be able to determine what good looks like on a role-by-role basis. There will be limited bias because it's very much based upon people within the business, and it will inevitably represent your culture because, to my point earlier, it will be using data of those who live and breathe the company culture on a day-to-day basis. The second step, once you've identified that what good looks like, identified in a very data-driven, unbiased way what you're looking for, is you start to evaluate your candidates to really determine what is their level of motivation, mental agility, and personality that they can bring to the role and bring to your business. So, as I mentioned, we've got the 3 assessments. This gives you an example of some of those, what the assessments ultimately look like. In the phone, you've got an example of our shape and our drive assessment. And in the computer, you've got an example of our brain assessment, which is gamified and adapted. Candidate experience is really crucial to us. And that's represented in the fact that every candidate or every person who takes the assessment, whether, regardless of whether they're eventually successful or not with your business, will receive access to this summary report here. Now, It's certainly in high level in comparison to what companies and you guys would receive in terms of actual results. It's minimal, but it's a nice little takeaway for a candidate to have in terms of neutral information that they could, in theory, go and use for their next process that they enter into. Now, there's even the option, I guess there's a real link here between with employee branding, is that these candidates or anybody who takes the assessment has the option to actually share their profile on LinkedIn. So all you need is a hashtag, your company name, to really demonstrate to that wider community and ultimately to your potential future talent pools that this is what somebody would receive upon completing the assessment. They'd ultimately get something out of spending a maximum 30 minutes completing the assessment. Now, in terms of what we see in completion rate sits at 86%. So 86% of candidates who start the assessments complete the process of all 3 assessments, and the candidate feedback speaks for itself. As you can see here on Google Reviews, candidates love it. Now, the final step in the process is very much to select the best candidate for you. Now, in theory, there's no right or wrong profile, but there's somebody, you can find the candidate who is more likely to thrive within a role through comparing and contrasting all of the candidates who apply for that role. So we have a certain functionality here called our recruitment campaign functionality, which basically gives you the opportunity to compare and contrast all candidates applying for the same role based upon their global scoring. And that global scoring, as you can see here, Ruben scoring 69%, Juliet 63%, Fatima 63%, etc. That 69, 63, 63% is that comparison between their pure results, having completed the assessment, and that what good looks like that we spoke about in step 1. In terms of information then, and what we provide on a candidate and an individual, we delve into that global scoring, and in a very aesthetically pleasing, very visual way, very easy to understand way, we will identify and explain the strengths and weaknesses for the role, and ultimately identify if there's any specific gap that you will look to then question at that interview stage. And we have a full reporting suite that lends itself to enable you to facilitate that questioning as specifically and as accurately as possible. In terms of actual results, what can we expect to see when we use predictive recruitment and we use this psychological theory very much in a proactive way? Well, an example really is a company that we have worked with most recently, Spencer Ogden, who have really focused in on the predictive recruitment element of their process, bringing behavioral science into the process, using AI to identify that what good looks like. Now, they had some targets around increasing diversity, gender diversity in particular. And so they were really excited to see the results that they could achieve in quite simply just 8 months. They were increased their gender diversity by over 20%, specifically in their London office, whilst really demonstrating to the kind of the wider business that there can be a huge improvement when it came to that bottom line. They saw that their interview to hire ratio was reduced by over 1/3, which obviously sees some great benefits from a bottom line perspective. We also use, as you can imagine, this approach ourselves. Our own TA for the UK at AssessFirst joined actually this year and has seen a big shift in the way that she can approach her work. She's been interviewing less people with this approach, but still finding great candidates more quickly, and importantly so, from more diverse backgrounds. Why? Because in theory, by looking at elements outside of a CV, by looking at elements outside of just what somebody's experience says on LinkedIn, she's able to widen that talent pool. Now, we've covered a lot of information there, but from a behavioural science and assessment perspective, I guess the hard work is now done. You've seen that the advantages of embedding behavioural science into the process, into the recruitment process in particular, will give you a solid base upon which you can diversify, benefits and start to recruit that right individual. And we've seen it very much from a talent acquisition, very much a recruitment perspective. One thing we haven't kind of covered is from a talent management perspective, how can you start to really utilize this information that we can draw from assessments on somebody's personality, motivation, and mental agility? And for that, I want to introduce to you our Talent Mapper functionality, which ultimately allows you to see in a very visual way the DNA of your team, the blueprint of your team, business unit, even essentially the whole company, and to see in very descriptive terms how a team might interact socially, as you can see here, and basically runs through comparison of the team, plots the team based upon the 12 key behaviours that we assess in the personality assessment. So as an example, you can see here that the majority of the team actually sit within that sector here. And you can see there's this huge similarity across their consistency in actually spontaneously approaching others. You can see here in degree of involvement, when we look at this key behaviour, again, the team all sit within that second half of that positioning when you see them going beyond assigned tasks. This gives you, or certainly gives a manager, understanding of what makes some people stand out particularly. Here, again, the method of collaboration management style. You can see this looks at two key traits that we assess in our personality assessment: consultation of others before making decisions on the x-axis here, and assertiveness with others on the y-axis. This ultimately can help you understand if there's any outlying characters within the team that, you know, may possess qualities that would stand them as being maybe a manager or a leader of a team. It ultimately helps you understand more clearly what team you have within your companies and areas for team development. Here you can see persuasion style. We look at seeks to persuade others versus demonstration of diplomacy. And again, we can see that there's certain groups of people who have lower levels of persuasion and diplomacy, and maybe an opportunity here to really look to recruit somebody with those elements where you have a high level of diplomacy and persuasion for others. So you can really plan potentially what your future recruitment needs to look like in order to ultimately be successful. Now, what we've done is actually across the year, we've been working alongside the Recruitment Leaders 100, which is a community that ultimately are, I guess, the thought leaders of the TA industry in particular. And what we've been doing is we have been offering them that talent mapping functionality for free. And it's been a really good and fast way to roll out a no-risk approach to behavioural assessments and ultimately get them understanding which type of teams they have within their businesses, and certainly anticipate the future recruits that they may want to recruit into their team. Now, AssessFirst is obviously partnered with Eploy. We'd like to extend that offer to everybody on the session and everybody within the Eploy community. So if you'd like to get a behavioural map of your team, totally free, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message, and we can certainly arrange that. Now, the success of any team, any relationship, certainly in the long term, will depend also on the affinity between individuals in that team, right? Unlocking insight into this helps, certainly during the recruitment phase, of course, to see potential affinity. But it will also help from the future leadership, learning, development and management of that individual. So here you can see a certain functionality that we have, which we call the managerial fit, which basically allows the comparison and the understanding of how a manager and a subordinate will actually work together in the workplace, talk through preferred leadership styles, again, to really facilitate and help with that manager in managing that individual, and think about how they may have to change and vary their management style slightly, depending upon what the recipient of that management style really suits better with. So you can see here, it runs through some detail as to how profiles are complementary and basically provides tips on how to make the relationship work well. Another element is obviously team affinity. So understanding that from a team perspective, and very much a kind of a peer-to-peer perspective. And we have our affinity functionality, which does just that. As long as 2 individual team members is able to actually complete the assessment, we can identify the likelihood that they will get on well within the working environment together, looking at their level of ease for interaction, but also how well do they collaborate? Are they productive on the job? Looking at if they have the same working style, if they have the same, ultimately, motivations and drivers. And so the final piece of the Trinity that I wanted to talk about and cover is looking at how all of this information can help us implement or continue to be successful with any hybrid working design that we want to push into our businesses. Why is this important? Well, 84% of people who had to work from home during the pandemic say they want to continue working from home at least some of the time, a couple of days a week in the future. So clearly hybrid or remote working is about employer brand as much as it is about employee operations. You can see here that there's been, since the lifting of lockdown, a steady increase in the return of people traveling to work, whilst there has been a steady decrease of working exclusively from home. That was probably anticipated. But ultimately, what we can do is we can really look to objectively decide how to manage who is in the office, when, and how frequently, all in the attempt to better understand our team members who sit within our teams today. And for that, there's kind of 2 criteria. The first is we need to have a look at how people actually deal with distant relationships. Is this something that actually means that they are less autonomous? Maybe it makes them feel more isolated and more alone. And secondly, the idea of self-discipline. Have you got people on your team who are driven, self-driven, and don't necessarily always need somebody managing them behind them? Now, all of this is based on the behavioural profiles generated through your assessments. Basically, you're able to assess objective information of somebody's ability to successfully work remotely. Our research in this area has actually been presented recently this year at the European Congress of Psychology, and we revealed through that research 3 key behaviours aligned with people who find remote working difficult. So those who don't necessarily thrive when remote working. And what we found is actually there were those individuals who need to have work centered on relationships. They need some form of recognition in order to thrive. And thirdly, they think about things very operationally and are very much rooted in the present. Conversely, people then successful at remote working from a work perspective have a strong autonomy, can navigate uncertainty, are self-disciplined, have a high level of average reasoning skills. So knowing this from our research, we can see a person's preferred working environment. And this is something that we've actually built into the application, as you can see here in the kind of left-hand side in the corner, the little house and the computer there, the icon in blue. Behind the tool, everybody who's taken the assessment, we are able to compare their results against what we call a remote work model, which combines all of those elements, all of those behaviors associated with the successful and not so much successful, not those who are super successful within a working remote environment, and basically gives us an idea of the likelihood that they will actually do well and thrive and be happy when working remotely. So you can see here in this example, Garrett, you can see he mainly likes working remotely, and that's very much recognizable when looking at his maintaining of distant relationships and his level of self-discipline here that we spoke about earlier. In contrast, we have Deborah here, who actually is very much more an office first individual, and we can delve into the specific reasons why, looking again at her maintaining of distant relationships and her level of self-discipline here. So all drawing that information from our assessments, no additional information required. The functionality is already built in to the tool, again, to just provide you with information to make sure that you're making the right decision on people. Now, there's obviously a lot of information there, and you're probably thinking, okay, this is all great, but how does this actually work when we're talking about the Eploy AssessFirst partnership, about the actual integration itself? Now, obviously, we have lots of different interfaces. Here's an example of one specific, but what you can really get from the integration through Eploy and ourselves is you can send our assessments, you can view results, you can view reports, you can view basically everything directly on the platform. Again, really making sure that you're kind of providing you with one less admin task during the process, really looking to make the process as easy as possible. Now, if you want some more information on what that actually looks like for a specific use case or a specific functionality, then we can certainly jump on a call and delve into that. So, as I mentioned, that is a lot of information covered. I guess the key takeaways that I want you to really touch on, to kind of remember, I guess, is we're now at a point in technology where we can use descriptive psychometrics and behavioral science and get them to work for us much more effectively than they have been doing for the last 5 and 6 years. We've got those 3 assessments that we can use on candidates and existing employees that will give you the benchmark against which AI will be able to work for. And the idea is just really to ensure that you're spending less time finding better people from more diverse backgrounds, and inevitably that will be, improving several KPIs that you will have that sit within the business. As I mentioned before, if you'd like to trial advanced behavioural science with us and do one of the talent mapping exercises with your own teams, you are very, very much welcome to do so. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know. This code here, a flash of this, should hopefully send you through to my LinkedIn page, and in the meantime, I'm sure Bruce and his team will take any kind of specific queries if you have any, and send them through to us. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully that's given you a bit of insight into how we can really look to use AI and make the most out of psychometrics and take it that step further. I guess it's over to questions, Bruce.
Thanks, Becca. That was excellent. Really generous offer as well with the talent map. Just wanted to clarify on that. So is that an offer to do a talent map of the talent acquisition team at any of our customers who want to take it up?
I mean, it's pretty open-ended. It can be any type of team. I mean, obviously not too large, but yeah, within reason, any team. So it can be, either your existing TA team, or it can even be maybe a sub team that you want to trial it out on with some of your hiring managers.
Great. I think that's a great way to take a look at the sophistication of the platform and the types of reports that you can get out of it. I think that'd be really excellent. We'll make sure to send all your details in a follow-up email to everyone who's attended and those who weren't able to make it today. Just having a quick look, got a few questions for you if you've got a moment for us, Becca.
Of course.
So, do you recommend people retake assessments, i.e. after the candidate has been hired?
Good question. And I guess it depends upon the assessment. Fun fact, actually, if you hear, our personality plateaus, I think it's approximately 30 or 31 years of age. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'll let everyone take that information away. We're all doomed. No, but with that in mind, what we actually advise is the personality and mental agility assessment. Because they're very much associated with us as individuals, we need not, you need not retake them. If it's something that you want to do systematically every year, of course, no problem, but the likelihood is that the results won't necessarily change that much. What will change, however, is our drive assessment and people's individual motivations. Why? Because that's the element that tends to change with environmental external factors. So if, for example, you suddenly get pregnant, money, could be a motivator where previously it wasn't necessarily the case. So for that reason, we would advise that the motivations assessment, our drive assessment, is completed every year.
Okay.
To keep that up to date.
Thanks. So I guess kind of a follow-on question from that, really. Can candidates cheat the assessments?
Good question. If they're geniuses, possibly. No. The way that we have developed the assessments obviously has been in a way that we want to remove as much cheating as possible. For our shape and our drive assessments, so our personality and our motivations assessment, the format is very much 90 questions with 20 key traits assessed across that 90 questions, meaning that each trait is assessed approximately 8 to 10 times each, and always compared against a different trait. So good luck trying to cheat that, because you will just get completely lost trying to always answer in the same manner for each 20 trait. And it's important to note, actually, for our shape and our drive assessment, there is no right or wrong answer. You know, there's no right or wrong personality. There's no right or wrong motivation. It's just very much explaining and defining what it is or who it is that you are. And really seeing if it's a right fit for that role or for that company, not just for the business's perspective and advantage, but obviously for the individual's advantage. And then for the brain assessment, the cognitive ability piece, as you can imagine, there is a right or wrong answer to that. What we have done is, I think I briefly mentioned it in the presentation, is it's gamified and it's adaptive. So future questions are very much based upon previous answers, meaning that you know, there's so many different paths or questions that you can follow. The likelihood that one assessment is going to be the same as the other is very unlikely.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, someone's asked $1 million question. Hopefully the answer isn't $1 million. How much does it cost?
I like that. How much does it cost? So difficult question. I guess I can't give you an exact answer now, but we do differ in our pricing model in comparison to a lot of psychometric tools out there, in that the majority will charge per assessment. Whereas we charge per user. So a user will be a definition of a user will vary from business to business. It may be an HR exec, it may be a recruiter, it may be a TA assistant, whatever it may be. Somebody who ultimately has the license and the authority to administer the assessments, download the reports for hiring managers, etc. This means that everybody will have the opportunity to take the assessment. You know, no one's really restricted on where in the process and what role they will apply the assessment to because of cost. And that's really the main reason why we do it. So pricing starts at anywhere from 5,000 annual cost through and up, you know, to potentially 18,000 for an enterprise. But yeah, I guess if there's anyone with specific requests, then yeah, we can.
Okay, so